Bulavinaka. Before we actually begin, I will request Dr. Rup Singh to please escort our guests, our chief guests, the Vice Chancellor, the Dean, and the Regional Director of the Pacific Sub-Regional Office of ADB. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will now begin. The Pro-Chancellor and Chair of Council, Mr. Winston Thompson, the Vice-Chancellor and President, Professor Paul Ahluwalia, the Regional Director of the Pacific Sub-Regional Office of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Masayuki Tachiri, the Governor of Reserve Bank of Fiji, the heads of various government institutions and USP senior management, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the School of Economics of the Faculty of Business and Economics, the Center of the Economic Policy and Modeling, and the Pacific Sub-Regional Office of the Asian Development Bank, I warmly welcome you all to the launching workshop, Strengthening Economic Modeling and Policy Research in Fiji. Bulavinaka, and welcome to those who are with us here at the Japan Pacific ICT Multipurpose Theatre at the University of the South Pacific, and those who have joined us through the live stream. I am Pauline, your hostess for this morning. The organizers of this launching workshop are the Center for Economic Policy and Modeling, located here at the University of the South Pacific, and the Pacific Sub-Regional Office of the Asian Development Bank, located here in Suva. This workshop showcases activities of the Center for Economic Policy and Modeling and the newly developed USP Fiji CGE Computable General Equilibrium model. It discusses an application of the CGE model to assess economy-wide impacts of shocks to the Fiji economy. I'll just go over the program briefly. I know you were sent the programs, but just to keep us in touch, we will soon after this have the garlanding, and then we will have the welcome remarks from the Vice Chancellor and President, Professor Paul Ahluwalia. This will be followed by the introductory remarks by Mr. Masayuki Tachiri, Director, Pacific Sub-Regional Office, the Asian Development Bank. After that, we will have the summary of the activities of the Center by Dr. Rup Singh and Dr. Sotia Om, School of Economics and Center for Economic Policy and Modeling, USP, which will be followed by a question and answer session, and then we will have our coffee break. Then we will have the presentation of research from Dr. Sotia Om. Again, we will have a chance to have question and answer and discussion, and finally we'll have the closing remarks. The closing remarks will be delivered by Mr. Kamueli Naingama, Deputy Government Statistician, Fiji Islands Bureau of Statistics. I now call upon Esther and Melissa to come and garland our chief guests. Vinaka, Esther, and Melissa. I'm sorry, I was supposed to go over the housekeeping as well. We have exits on my left, upstairs and downstairs, and through the foyers you will find the restrooms. Thank you. I will now invite the USP's Vice Chancellor to deliver his welcoming address. Vinaka.
Thank you, Pauline. Pro-Chancellor and Chair of USP Council, Mr. Winston Thompson, Mr. Masayuki Tachiri, the Regional Director of the Pacific Sub-Regional Office of the Asia Development Bank, staff members of the ADB Pacific Sub-Regional Office in Suva, distinguished representatives of various agencies of the Fiji government, Fiji Islands Bureau of Statistics, and the Reserve Bank of Fiji, including the Governor of the bank, prominent staff of the United Nations, crop agencies, and development partners of the university, Professor Moini Singh, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Research at FNU, Professor Derek Armstrong, DVC Research and Innovation International at USP, Professor Arvind Patel, the Acting Dean, Faculty of Business and Economics, Dean Akanisi from our Faculty of Arts, Law and Education, professors, heads of schools, staff and students of the university, and of course viewers across the world who are seeing us online through live stream, invited guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Let me also add my Bula Vinaka to all of you and a good morning and warm welcome to the University of the South Pacific. I'm very pleased that the university is pushing its drive towards research excellence, and to say we're going to witness firsthand the USP's own macroeconomic model that has been developed in-house to support economic policy in Fiji. So I wish to congratulate the Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics and staff from the School of Economics, and in particular the Center for Economic Policy and Modeling, to have accomplished this innovation for the university. And my special commendation to Dr. Satya Om, the Acting Director of the Center. As a backdrop, let me briefly share the history of the Modeling Center with you. The Center for Economic Policy and Modeling became operational in 2016 under the leadership of the Acting Dean. And the Center aspires to achieve excellence in research and innovation in order to promote sustainable economic development in the Pacific region through rigorous and high-quality research outputs. This, we think, will help regional governments deal with various economic challenges that they face. The Center, which works closely with the School of Economics, maintains sustainable and meaningful partnerships with regional governments, donor and international agencies, and research institutions within the region and beyond, as we can see today its relationship with the ADB. The Modeling Center continues to benefit from that USP-ADB cooperation agreement that was signed in July 2017, and that agreement promotes knowledge cooperation between the institutions as combined academic knowledge and practical policy experiences that are crucial for developing innovative and sustainable solutions. While the Center has hosted a number of joint events with the ADB in the past, I'm delighted to inform you that just recently the Center has developed a state-of-the-art economic model, which Pauline talked about, for Fiji. And I officially annotate this model as a USP computable general equilibrium model for Fiji, and we will see later today or this morning its real-time application to evaluate the impact of the various shocks on the Fiji economy. I'm also informed that while the model is operationally ready, staff of the School of Economics and the Modeling Center have already revised the model's database to 2015, and this reflects an endogenous revision to the new model already, which was developed with the 2011 data set. I'm also informed that a few working papers have been completed, including an application of the model to evaluate the ex-post impact of Cyclone Winston that hit Fiji in 2016, and an ex-ante impact of a 10% minimum wage increase on Fiji's economy. We will get to the details of these simulations, I'm sure, later in the program. I'm also sure that USP and the ADB partnership will continue to support the university and the core activities of this modeling center. I'm pleased that the ADB's chief economist is indeed scheduled to visit the university to present the latest Asian Development Outlook in about a month's time, and I hope that all of you will be here for that event as well. So I wish you a very successful launching workshop and trust that this will be a most productive morning. Vanaka Vekalevu, and thank you.
Thank you, VC. Now I will call upon Mr. Masayuki Tachiri, the Director Pacific Sub-Regional Office of the Asian Development Bank, to address us.
I'm Professor Paul Alwaria, Vice Chancellor and the President of University of the South Pacific, Governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji, distinguished professors, government officials, and also fellow development partners. Bulabinaka, good morning. It is my pleasure to witness the launching of this workshop on the strengthening economic modeling and the policy research in Fiji, jointly organized by the University of South Pacific, Center for Economic Modeling, and also the Asian Development Bank South Pacific Regional Office. Let me echo Vice Chancellor in congratulating the launch of this important workshop as well as this Center for Economic Policy and Modeling. And this is a great achievement to advance the research works for Fiji and also the rest of the Pacific countries. It is very important to have a very scientific and also data-based policy research. And this economic modeling is a vital input for those informed policy decision-making. The Asian Development Bank is working with the government, academic, and also other stakeholders in various operations. Of course, we are financing various projects by providing the finance, but our operation is not limited to those financing. We do provide research services. We also support various analytical and policy advice. And those so-called knowledge services are actually getting more important than the finance itself. This is particularly important for the middle-income countries, including Fiji. Eventually, the countries will finance their own operations by itself, but the various research knowledge available outside of the country is increasingly important. And ADB and other partners can play a role to facilitate the flow of knowledge. And I believe that this center can play a very vital role for that use of the informed, so those analytics and the researches. Well, let me again congratulate the USP and the Center for Economic Policy Modeling to start this important initiative, and also achieved already some of the research initiative completed in a short time. I was once the economics student some time ago, and I'm very excited to be part of that. I'm very interested personally about the result of this study. To wrap up my short remark, let me express my thanks again to the Vice Chancellor and the USP colleagues to realize this important event. And also I would like to note again that our Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank is coming to USP, and that is scheduled on 6th of May. And hopefully all of you can join that important event too. Thank you very much, and Vinaka Vakalevu.
I now request that Dr. Rup Singh, if you could please escort our chief guests to be seated in the front middle row, please, so that we can all enjoy together the next part of the program, which is a presentation of the activities of the Center for Economic Policy and Modeling by Dr. Sotia Om, the Acting Director of the Pacific Center for Economic Policy, USP, and Dr. Rup Singh, the Acting Head of School of Economics, USP. This will be followed by a short time of questions and answers. So let us now listen to them.
Thank you, Pauline. The Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor of the University, invited guests, friends and colleagues. This is my honor to welcome you again to the University, and the School of Economics and Center for Economic Policy and Modeling remain very strong in terms of how we would want our research outputs be made relevant to policymaking in the region. And today I'm happy to go over the activities of the center as well as the CGE model that we've recently completed. And later in the day, you will see the results of simulations that we can do from the model. Like a good economist, I will not waste a lot of time. We have a few things to do. So I'll go straight into what we're talking about here. Let me briefly give an overview of the center. The center is tasked to conduct rigorous, high-level or high-quality research to help deal with the economic challenges that the region may face. And in so doing, the primary objectives are to coordinate research and capacity development exercises in the region, to be an exemplar of economic modeling, a center where the region can look upon to help them find solutions to economic problems. It intends to strengthen research activities within the center and of course in the school, and that's the reason for strong collaboration between the two. We intend to seek and conduct consultancy and commissioned research exercises to generate income for the center and for the university. We want to support the school in terms of postgrad research and develop sustainable policy-oriented research in the wider FBE. Now let me briefly go over what a macro model is all about. The model is a scientific way of analyzing the economy as opposed to making loose or contentious economic commentary. It is a tool that allows analysts and economists to better predict the economy. And so it is a mathematical relationship of the key economic relationships that we think guides the economic behavior. It shows how the markets work to determine two important outcomes, which is different price levels, it could be interest rates, exchange rate, inflation rate, and the like, including the wage rate. I think part of it is going to be discussed later on, and the quantities, which is income, GDP, and the rest. We could say it is a robust framework that will help us gauge the strengths of the economy, impact of various policies, or any other domestic or external shocks that may hit the economy. And so what are the shocks? I've put a few up in there for you. These are exogenous forces that we think we can quantify in data and run through the model to see its impact. These shocks could be internal, external, or induced within the system. Now, why we need economic models? Well, I think policymakers have a very hard task these days because of immense uncertainty globally and also in the different markets. The economies are quite large and complicated system, and sometimes we make economic policy with limited understanding of the economy itself. So what the model does is that it tries to simplify the complexity in the system, but keeping in mind all the salient features that are important for policy making. And these are important elasticities, preference parameters, technological implications, institutional responsiveness to shocks, and the like. The problem is that the policy impacts are very much uncertain, just like shooting in the dark. So how do we ensure what we are doing with the policy really makes impact, and there are various measures of this. In the new Keynesian view, it is thought that policies, if they are perfectly forecasted or predicted, will have no impact on the economy. So there's a kind of thing that we need to take care of before we actually design and implement policies. Why would we need macro models? Well, there are 3 or 4 reasons as to why we need one. First is to test economic theory and therefore predict the dynamics. We have good stock of literature to inform us about how things will behave in theory. In other words, when there is an equilibrium in the system. But there is absolutely no guarantee that any economy would be in equilibrium at any point in time. So the real-time dynamic nature of responses to shocks that happen in the economy is very different compared to what textbook models or textbooks will tell us. The second usefulness of model is to conduct policy-oriented research exercises, perform simulations to see the impact of things which would have eventuated already, or things that we think may happen in the economy in the near term. And some models allow us to generate short to medium-term forecasts. However, this is what we are not going to do here with the CGE. Now, who needs these models? Obviously, the government and the key agencies who are involved in economic analysis, the central bank, the statistical agencies like the Fiji Islands Bureau of Statistics, research community, economists, commentators, donor development partners, investment banks, and others. At the university, I think it will be useful for the USP economists who would like to make commentary on economic policy, analysts, researchers, including our students. And one of the aspirations of this modeling exercise is to make a lower version of the model available to our graduate students who can actually simulate the model, play around with it, and to see how difficult and different it is in the real life compared to what the textbook is all about. There are a few issues in modeling in the region, I would say, and these are commitment of resources. This is a challenging exercise which takes a lot of energy and time. So we need to sacrifice time and funding, and of course there needs to be institutional goodwill to sort of promote the continuity of these things. Modeling requires technical expertise, and this is an area of lack in the region. And I think the way in which we are going to get around this problem is that we'll ensure that there is a good stock of knowledge transfer that would happen very soon from this modeling exercise. We also need software and key data sets, and doing a large model like this requires extensive data sets. And regardless the nature of the NSS or NSO in the region, you will always find that data is a problem. So we will try to get around that data problem. But there are some good things about Fiji, PNG, and Samoa. At least their basic data sets which are required for such a model is available. Let me very briefly give you the different macro models that potentially we could have done, and then of course justify why we have taken the CGE, which is on the right extreme at the top. Models are either driven by data or by economic theory. So we've chosen one which doesn't chew us too much on data, but are very strongly grounded on the theory. We have had other models as well, and of course we can use that on the side to do economic projections. Give you a brief idea of the status of macro modeling in the Fiji economy. Details of this can be found into one of our research papers, which is available in our webpage. To date, we have 4 CGE models. The model that we have just done would be the 5th one. And in fact, all these 4 CGE models are now out of date because their input-output table, which is the database for the model, is very old. The first one, developed by Theo Leventis in 1999 for the Fijian government, used the original input-output table developed by one of our own staff, Dr. Sunil Kumar. And I was trying to get hold of that. We couldn't get that to see what it was in there. And then Leventis advanced that model in 2004 with the dynamic version. And of course, we had the luxury of using this model at that time when I was an employee of the Reserve Bank. And thanks to the bank for allowing me into this. Then this was taken on by Professor Praresh Narayan, who is now in Australia. He developed further, strengthened the tourism bits of it, and published a few papers. And my recent communication with Professor Paresh is that he's lost interest in this area, and that is not a very good news. Our own Dr. Nilesh Gounder did some revisions of the CGE model in 2013 in his PhD studies, and Dr. Gounder tells me that this is of his thing in the past life. So seriously, while we need this, we have people who can deliver, but it's very hard to get them or get their interest back to modeling as to what we want. We have two other simultaneous macroeconomic models. So if I go back a bit, the ones I've described is here, and the ones I'm going to describe now is down this stream. This was done by myself in 2009, and staff of the Reserve Bank of Fiji recently in 2013, Isoa. I think Isoa is in the room because he informed me that he was coming to this presentation. The good part of these second type of model is that it is quite aggregated. So it's very useful if you're looking at the macro aggregates alone. But if you wanted to do detailed analysis of the economy, the industries, and the sectors, for example, if you're saying if there was a strike in the sugar industry, what would happen to the economy, to the industry, to the livelihoods of people and all of that? These simultaneous macro models cannot answer that question, unfortunately. So I too left that game and I joined the CGE people. The CGE model allows us to do that because our purpose here is to conduct detailed economic policy analysis and simulations on the economy as well as on the different industries and sectors. And by all means, I think we can do that with CGE. We're not going to stop this exercise here in Fiji. I think the Center is very much committed to doing the same thing for the region, and Samoa and Vanuatu look to be the two new other countries that we can extend this exercise to. So we were tasked in around 2016. We were told that we needed such a model which will capture the details of the sectors as well as of the aggregate economy and on the industries. And the previous VC told us that, look, we wanted a model that should be able to simulate the impact of various things on the economy. So we said, okay, we'll think about it and we'll work on it. And we did it. So what we did was we went to the Bureau of Statistics and we said, look, we needed the most updated input-output table. The input-output table is the database for the CGE model. It forms the database. And the Bureau told us that they were working on it. They did not have one which was up and ready for us to take on board. So we said, well, what is the next thing to do? Have you got a supply and use table? We can develop an input-output table from supply and use table. At least that is the basis. And fortunately, they said yes. So we worked with the 2011 supply and use table and projected an input-output table which would reflect the economy as of 2011. We presented this to the Bureau and we got a heads up saying, well, this is good. That formed the database of the model that we're going to showcase to you today. However, after doing everything that we wanted to do, we started revising that already. And we revised it to 2015. So now we have the revised input-output table, which is the revised database for the model as of 2015. Now, whether you're looking at 2015 IO or 2018 IO will not make too much of a difference because the economic structure is not going to change tremendously in 3 years. So we are still confident that we can use 2015 input-output table, which is the database for the model. And this gives us the USP computable general equilibrium model for the Fiji economy. These are a few terms I will skip. You can read through the slides to see what we mean by computable, equilibrium, all of that. But the most important part of it is that this is a general equilibrium model. So the model will hit an equilibrium when all the industries and sectors are at equilibrium. So it's like a general equilibrium construct. This is the broad structure of it, and details of this will be provided to you after the break. We'll show you how the model actually operates, sources, inputs, and quantifies the demand and supply conditions within each of the sectors and industries. Some people say that this is a black box kind of thing. You've got so many equations and you're putting things in there, we just don't know what's happening. Is there any connection to the theory? There is a very strong connection of how the CGE model works to the economic theory. Whenever there is excess demand or supply, the supply-demand conditions of relevant sectors and industries are going to adjust to ensure that the prices which is predicted by those sectors connect to generate the equilibrium of the economy. So it's very much related to what we teach in economics. So we got this model. We developed this, which has got 101 sectors by 2 input sources, by 4 trade transport margins, by 10 occupations and inputs, plus the final demands, plus identities added together to give a complicated 8,000 plus equation model. And this is quite a large number of equations. You can imagine the data demand for this and the types of energy and frustration that we have put into this before we can say that this works. So this represents the Fiji economy and its economic structures. The IO is 2011, which was based on the supply and use table. 56 industries by 114 products. We expanded it in 3 versions. So first version, we compressed it down a bit to 19 industries, then 56 to 48, which is the manageable one, and the other one more comprehensive, 101 industries to 48 products. These are the 3 versions. So you could say model version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 if you like. And the simulations which we are going to present to you today is based on the version 1, 19 by 19 structure of the IO. And a few weeks ago, we updated the database to 2015. So that's version 2. Good news about that is that when we updated the database and we checked with the economic fundamentals and the data released by the Bureau and the central bank and all of that, a lot of things matched. We were very happy that the IO matched with what reality was in 2015. But the bad news is, soon after we did this work, we got this release of the GDP, which was rebased to 2015. So again, another series of work for us. Now, we are going to do that. We'll call that version 2.1. And that will be with us, and we'll keep innovating on it as we get more information and data, as we can further classify the different sectors, like households, for example, and incorporate a few more features into the model that we think will be relevant. So this process will continue, and we'll keep updating you through our webpage and our papers that we'll be producing out of this. And we'll be using this for various purposes moving forward. This basically explains what the model is all about. It's based on its underlying system has very strong micro foundations, which uses optimization theory. As you will see, the system is based on neoclassical framework within the general economic equilibrium construct. The producers, investors within the system minimize their cost, subject to their technology and the costs and their relative returns. The households maximize utility subject to budget constraints. Both of these agents' behavior is governed by intertemporal substitution, which has the CES kind of production function and time varying risk factors. Export demands is a negative function of the export price and the price taking environment. Government expenditure is based on fiscal policy stance. Monetary policy variables are not so specific, but interest rate remains the key to determine consumption, trade, and production. Exchange rate, which is the nominal anchor for monetary policy, is also the numerator for prices. Markets are flexible, so agents cannot overly make supernormal profits. The prices are based on marginal conditions. The parameters and elasticities that we use in this model are derived from the GTAP. We're going to link this to GTAP as well later down the line. So it'll help us to sort of promote and create more dynamic versions of this. Also from research knowledge existing in Fiji from the previous CGE models, recent surveys of the economy and the like. The model is Orani based, the Australian version. It is comparative in nature, so it gives you simulations from the baseline 2015, and we use GEMPEG software to run this. Now I think I will take 2 minutes to ask Dr. Om to showcase us the model. So I'm asking him, like my dean would ask me, go and simulate 5% or 10%, maybe 10%, okay? 10% increase in government spending. How will that impact the economy? So, Dr. Om, please run the model here right in front of us and show us how will a 10% increase in government spending impact the economy.
Let me first express my thanks to the Vice Chancellor, Professor Pal Aluwalia, the Regional Director of ADB, for very kind words and encouragement. Distinguished guests today and students are here. All right. So just one remark before I start. In the age of big data, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, so more and more the use of the computer-based model is very critical and important and fashionable and pretty cool too, no? Student. So think about it and hope that you're interested in the model. All right. So I'm going to showcase a little bit how it is done. Dr. Rup is very kind to save the time and work to explain a lot of complication of what it is all about. So I'm trying to show you how the code is writing in complicated mathematical form into this kind of coding that capture all the demand for intermediate inputs, primary factors, identity, and the like. So it's a lot of coding. One line, it represents 2 or 300 equations actually to capture all those, depend on the size of the industry and sector that we are analyzing. So there's a lot of tiny stuff that are doing it very tedious. Okay, that's a model kind of code. Then to operationalize it, we need to tell the model what we want from the simulation. So we need to tell the model what is it to analyze. In the case, for example, if we want to understand the increase of household consumption by 2%, the real rate by 10%, that's how we tell the model to produce the outcome for us. So I'm going to run through of it a little bit. Actually, it's more interactive, but because I'm quite advanced in using the model, so I'm kind of using the batch file that directly tell the model to run automatically, just one click. So I do one click, and it would go through the whole thing like this. It could take, if we're going to make it more complicated, it take hours so that we can have the solution. Run through, we get the outcome here. That's pretty extensive, from the macro outcome, specific changes in a certain variable and things like that. I click on this, it would show me all the key macro variable. So you don't know what name it is, look like complicated, but actually we can copy and paste it on the worksheet, and then you have the full name and the changes and the outcome that produced by the model. You see that? It's pretty cool, right? So I'm going to go into detail later on. That's it, how it works. Students, so stay around. Okay, is it okay?
That's good.
All right. So that's it, my job. Not finished yet. So stay around after break.
Thank you. Well, that's the model itself, and of course, he just ran one simulation. You could run a combination of simulations as well, depending on what is happening in the economy or what you expect would happen in the economy. So what will happen after this is that we'll give more intensive training to our staff and postgrad students and to our other agencies in the government and the Reserve Bank and Bureau of States of how we will use this and make sense out of the numbers that we get. Now, actually making sense of the numbers will come after the break, so please stick around. What can the model do? Well, it can perform simulations, as you can see. So, we can ask the question, what is the impact of tight liquidity situation on the Fiji economy? If we can quantify that in terms of the exogenous variable that we can shock in the system, we should be able to explain what is the impact of that. How much tightening of liquidity is required if we are looking at 3% growth? We can do that as well. How can central bank help? So we can simulate a few parameters to see if the money supply changes by so much or interest rate drops by so much, what can be done. But the fact is that many of these things that we're wanting to do has to be backed up by economic theory. We have to understand really what we are doing before we punch a few numbers and run the model and see that, well, this is the outcome. And it also allows us to analyze the impact of possible shocks before they happen or when we have shocks after the events. And I think we can do that for the industries and the sector. So if you looked at the details, you will see that it captures the economy as well as the industries and the sectors. So it's quite a useful thing. Now let me go over the key outputs of the center. In 2017 and 18, what we did was we were doing the groundwork, consulting our regional institutions, local institutions, engaging with them, trying to tell them, look, we are doing this, we need your support, the data and all of that. We appointed a adjunct professor for the center, which is the ADB's chief economist. We started developing database for economic and social indicators. We did strategic planning and documentation of that. We did ADB WTO USP Aid for Trade International Conference here under the center. We did ADB USP Regional Training Workshop on project analysis, and we did a few seminars in the school jointly with the center. More recently, we have published 5 working papers after we've done this model. The first was, we did the model, we sort of used it to project the economy. So the first one was done late 2018, an economic update of Fiji economy. I think we can do another one pretty soon. Then we documented the whole CGE model, which is available. We are currently working on the methodology of IO tabulation. I think most of it is done. Probably it will be available to us next week. We did 2 CG analysis. Both of them we will show to you. So at any point in time, if you are wanting to get details of this, let me take you through. Please log on to our website. Many times I have people asking me, where are the papers, where are the results? I'm going to show you where they are. So go to the School of Economics webpage. Okay, the center has its own webpage. There are a little bit of technical problems. We'll fix that and then we'll transfer most of it from here to that. Go to our research. Publications would be the papers and research which is already published in international ranked refereed journals. Okay, I do not have a lot of time to show you that, but you can explore. Working papers is the actual work in progress that we are doing, and most of these papers related to the model is here. So if you look at it, the new computable general equilibrium model, with one click you'll get it here. The CG based ex post impact analysis of TC Winston is here. Impact of minimum wages, the paper is here. And then we've got input output table. The paper is going to come into there pretty soon. So please download these and go through them. If you needed further details or if you invited us to do presentations, we'll be more than happy to do that with you. So now we have updated the IO 2015, which will also be available in the website for you. And this is very useful for the National Statistics Office. I'm told that the Bureau of Stats has been struggling with that, so probably this will help them to do their work much more easily. We'll do a manual for the use of the CG model, and that manual will be very much user-friendly. Of course, there'll be a lot of technical details, but we'll try to put things very simply for anyone to start using that. We'll make this model available to our graduate students and all of our staff in the school, in the center, and other staff in the faculty who would like to use the model. And then we'll do training and capacity development of this later down the line. The plan of activities for the center, we want to make the model a little bit more disaggregated and then do a number of joint research papers. We would want to do a CG analysis of the Fiji government budget when it comes in around mid of the year. And that will again be very useful. We are going to look into the software, training of this, and then, as I said earlier, we'll connect it to the global modeling community, which is the GTAP. And of course, other things will continue. Based on this, we should be able to sort of have a quarterly economic update come from the university. I always read what is in the Reserve Bank of Fiji's update, but of course we can do something similar to see how independently we may want to see the economy. Policy analysis of specific shocks, this is as and when required. So if there's something that the government wants to analyze on, or some agency of the government wants to do that, even Reserve Bank wants to work on, we'll be more than happy to work with them. There would be other research activities which our graduate students and staff would be using the model for. We'll continue to update the model and extend modeling to the region as well. Now let me do a little bit of contrast. Okay, there was a similar model, not an economic model, but a similar model produced by FSTE, science faculty, and that was a solar-powered car. Very nice. I see it every day when I come and go past that car parked very close to FPE. That car, it was our innovation. We celebrated, we continue to celebrate it against all the problems we have with climate change and all. That car is powered by the sun. This model, so we'll call it Model 1, that one. This one, we'll call it Model 2. So Model 2 is not powered by the sun. It's going to empower not only our sons, but sons and daughters, and of course the government of Fiji. That car is in version 1, but our model has got alternative versions already. That car, we can't drive, but this model, we will run the model. Not only us, it's our staff and our students. That car would be costly to replicate in the region, but as long as we have got supply and use table and IO tables, we can replicate this model for the region. That car cannot fit more than 3 or 4 people. But this model, if sustained well and is used to do economic analysis and better policy, can sustain the entire economy. Now, in conclusion, I would say sound and predictable policies are what we need, and the modeling exercise is a way to promote that. We are proud to say that we have done this model in-house, and I would like to see that we continue work on this, and I would like to see continued support for this activity from ADB and from the university as well. We'll keep the momentum going. We'll not let the model die its natural death, because I've seen that happening elsewhere. Thank you very much. Questions? Sorry, I think we can invite questions. Anything on the model, I mean, we can answer that. But if you have some technical questions, reserve it for the session after the break. That's where we talk about the technical details of things. Well, I'm saddened that there is no question, but I'm very happy as well. I think it's an indication that I was very clear on what I was wanting to say. So, well, sorry, there are 2 questions there. We'll take that. Thank you.
Even though I'm a member of SMT and USP staff. I'm really excited and very well presented, and it's something that we had talked about in SMT, and I want to congratulate the acting dean and also you as the acting head of school and all the staff who have worked behind it. You brought it so clearly and in a way that we can all understand, way that the university is really doing something in this area. So I'm just overwhelmed, and I feel I need to say that before I leave this room. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You mentioned using the 2011 data set and then comparing it against the 2015 economic development before using inputting the 2015 data set. You mentioned rebasing and adjusting off of the 2019 GDP figures. How are you, I guess, truthing the outcomes of the model against the actual economic performance of the country and staying ahead of the data?
Now, the Bureau revised their GDP after we have done that. So what I'm saying is that we need to do a little bit more work to sort of bring it in line with what the Bureau is currently saying. It's a bit like there's a goalpost and I'm shooting a penalty kick, and just before I've shot the goal, you've moved the post. So it's a bit hard for me. But that's what we're going to do shortly. And in terms of how we say that the model fits the economy, we look at the different macro aggregates and the results that come out in the national accounts and other publications, and we check and vet. If there are adjustments to be made, we can make it within the system. But just to ensure that if the GDP and all other things match, then of course we are confident that we are on the right track.
Where and when in this model will you be able to configure that, and what impact will it have? Not in the long run, what impact does it have currently right now on our ability to consume, ability to actually invest? So will the model tell me this?
Yes. Before I answer you, Professor, the governor is also wanting this. I think there's something burning in him about policy. So let's take both of them together.
So first of all, thank you and congratulations to USP on this model. There's been a lot of talk about liquidity, and I think most people really don't understand what liquidity is. People have said that people are hoarding. The reason liquidity is declined is because people are hoarding. That's absolutely not true. The Reserve Bank manages the level of liquidity consistent of what it thinks should be appropriate for the economy. So when liquidity was 700 and 800 million, did people complain that there's too much liquidity? The Reserve Bank, manages the liquidity, and that 700 or 800 million liquidity was what we thought was appropriate. Currently, liquidity is about 350 million, or about 347 million to be exact yesterday. That liquidity is called excess reserves. Whether it's $1, 1 cent, 100 million, 300 million, or 347 reserves. So it's excess. It's more than what the banks need. It's the surplus money that the commercial bank places with the Reserve Bank, not earning a single cent. So I think it's important, and I saw even in our presentation, tight liquidity. There's nothing that is called tight. It's excess reserves. So the amount of excess reserves has come down, and that has been deliberately brought about because that's where we want it to be. Tomorrow, with just a swipe of the pen, I can increase it to $1 billion. In fact, I can increase it up to 1.6 billion. So I think people need to understand this whole concept of liquidity before even, and be clear on what liquidity means before, making it such a big issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. There is a question back, I think.
Thank you very much, Governor. It's good for me. I mean, I saw the fixed deposit interest rates go up. Can you keep making it go up and up?
No.
So that's what I'm interested in. Thanks.
So there's always these two sides of the coin. When lending rate came down from 10% to as low as 5%, or some people are borrowing at below 5%, the borrowers are happy, but the depositors were not happy. Now when the deposit rate has gone to 5-6%, lending rate is still, weighted average lending rate is still around 6%. Some interest rates have gone up. So you always need to manage. And I always tell people, This issue is, you look around the world. US has been tightening monetary policy. Interest rates, US interest rates have gone up by almost 2.5 percentage points, or 250 basis points. The fact that interest rates are going up, it's a sign that the economy is growing too strong. If interest rates are too low, it simply means, sometimes it could mean that there's no growth in economy. So, you just don't look at the interest rate and see it as a bad thing. Interest rates, the fact that it's rising, it's a good thing. I mean, Japan has very low interest rates. In fact, it's negative interest rates. I mean, we invest our reserves in Japan, in Japanese yen, sending nothing. It's a sign that the economy is not growing strong. You see what is happening in Europe. So one has to not see that, but you have to see what the reason behind it. And the same thing we need to do with these models. Models are just numbers that we put in. It's what goes behind it. To say liquidity, and so coming back to the deposit rate and lending rate, there's always two sides of it. There's always people who will benefit and that people will cry. But it is our job to manage the economy.
Thank you, Governor. Coming back to Professor, your question, whether we can simulate the impact of tightening liquidity, whatever it is, on the liquidity, on the economy, the answer is yes, we can do that. Okay, any other questions? There's one up in there.
Naga, I'm Wandali from School of Economics. Just a question of interest in regards to the RBF's revelation in regards to the strength of the economy. I think the currency was devalued in 2009. Correct me if, and the claim is that the economy has been growing strong. If a currency is being devalued, there must be at some point, we must revalue it. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Rup. My question is, are the end users of the software or from the model, do they really need to have a sound economic background, or will this just, after we get it set and ready, we can push it over to government officials and so forth, and they can use the model even without any economic background and so forth? Thank you.
Thank you, Likima. Let me respond by saying that when you're using economic models, you need to understand the economics, because that's the fundamental, that's the theory that will inform you how or what the results that you get, what kind of sense does it make. But we're going to train people on the use of, the end users on the use of the model. We are training economics already in the school, so I think we should be fine. Okay, with no further questions, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this morning. I invite you to the morning tea outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a break of 20 minutes. We'll ask the chief guests to lead the way, please, and the others too. Thank you. So we come back at 10:30, please, and we'll be looking forward to the application, the presentation of the application of the USP Computable General Equilibrium Model. In particular, the exposed assessment of the impacts of Cyclone Winston and the potential minimum wage increase analysis for Fiji. That's what we'll be looking forward to after the break. Thank you. Can we call the House to order again? We're about to begin our second half of this program, the launching workshop. Okay, I'm sure we are looking forward to this presentation, and it is regarding the application of the USP Computable General Equilibrium Model, which Dr. Sotia Om will present, and he will be looking at the ex-post assessment of the impacts of Cyclone Winston, as well as the potential minimum wage increase analysis for Fiji. Dr. Sotia, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and thank you for staying around. So I'm very pleased to present, to showcase the practical application of the model, focusing on what happened in the past, so how we approach to look back, the assessment of the impact of Cyclone Winston on the economy as a whole. And another case is ex ante, that means a thing is going to happen, and try to see what is the implication if such event unfold, which is the potential minimum wage hike on the economy. So I think I'm going to take about 30 minutes and give more time for question. That's what I'm going to begin. A black hole is capture, right? So it's amazing, it's inspiring, and well, Rup had mentioned that, people question about the type of the thing that we are doing. CGE model sounds like a black box, similar to a black hole. But to us, it's not a black box. It's a toolbox. So we try to make it more transparent, reliable, and understood whatever the simulation that we conducted. All right? Okay, so I'm going to run through, again, Rup already mentioned about the model and everything. So I'm going to be very brief on the model itself, and then more on the application, trying to illustrate how to use it. All right, so Rup already alluded to why we need the model. In a nutshell, in the analysis, we want a good policy. So what is it, a good policy? Good policy means the policy that saves cost and money, but also save life and make life better for the most, not at all. So that's the thing that we see, the effective economic policy. So I'm not going to dwell on too much on that. Another point on we are doing from the academic perspective, we stick to the norm. We stick to our gun, which is the positive side of economic. Positive side of economy. That means we only analyze and tell what it is, not what it should be. Of course, sometimes we take a stance, we take decision on what should be. If we believe that something that goes wrong from the analysis. But more of the time from the academic perspective, we stick to our gun. That means we analyze what is the actual relationship in the economy and consequences. So leave the policy maker, make the value judgment what should be, whether it's a good policy or is it a bad policy. Things should be done better. Well, Rup already mentioned about this, so I'm not going to talk. Also the definition of CGE. And just to say a little bit to the student, actually, this part, that require a lot of basic understanding on microeconomic, how we view economic agent. In this case, how firms or industry that we believe would behave in the economy. So we assume that they are rational, they are profit maximizing entity. Okay, so they decide how to use intermediate input, which comprise of labor, and then in combination with some other primary factor, could be land if it is in agriculture, or using capital, equipment, machinery, combined with intermediate inputs to produce a certain good. So we're doing this for all the sector in the economy through this process. And we also have a similar way of understanding the behavior of investor, household, export sector, government, and the like. So we capture all this, how they make a decision, given whatever economic condition they are facing. For the household, it can be budget constraint. For the firm, it could be what is their production technology, things like that. So we're going to be having this in a detailed paper, analyzing the process of deriving all the solution for the demand for each of these process. Well, I mentioned that it's not a black box. Okay, so what we're analyzing, even though it's so complex, the economy could be so many things happening around, could be many industry, but in a nutshell, we can analyze it from a very simple demand and supply curve that at equilibrium. And we, as economists, we are very obsessed with two things. We want to measure only two things. What is price and quantity, right? So anything that disturbs the demand or supply or external change in prices should have some implication on all economic agents would react to such eventuality. So it could be that the shift in the supply curve or the demand curve, or simultaneously the shifting of the two curves. Then we calculate the new quantity and prices at the new equilibrium. That's how we analyze the economy as a whole. So it's a good question. The application that the model is good for to ask what if question, right? What is the government increase tax, remove tariff, invest in infrastructure, improve business environment and trade. So these are the things that the model is capable of quantifying. And in the case that later on that I'm going to talk about with the impact of the minimum wage, and to look back how we're going, and seemingly that we cannot use the model to quantify the impact that happened to the economy. And other thing that we believe that we can quantify and use the model to analyze the impact. Okay, model is complicated because you need such a kind of structure of data. Okay, the input-output table that capture all the transaction and flow in the economy for all economic agent. It can be producer, it can investor, household, export, government, and inventory when the goods are produced in the economy. And how firms or producers organize their production process, that illustrated in the diagram that I showed earlier. So on the column 1, you will see that how this flow is captured by the data. So basic flow using our intermediate input, the transport, trade and transport margin add up to that input, and those output subject to taxes in combination of using intermediate primary factor, which is labor, capital, land, and some other direct costs or tax on production. So that's the complication. Some of the data actually more than 3 dimensions. Okay, so it's not easy to see by the naked eye. That's why people are quite reluctant to do this kind of stuff. But the software actually allows us to manage the sheer size of the database that required to use in the CGE. Well, Rup already alluded to the process that we've been doing in having this complicated data. We managed to have a 101 sector by 101 products in the economy that capture in this, and follow the important rule that the data have to be balanced. It's balanced to a very exact level. That means the production cost should equal the output, and the number should not deviate from 0.01%. That means exactly much before we run any simulation. Of course, because the input-output table and supply-use table share similar feature, and then it has to comply with the fact that the key macroeconomic indicator, such as GDP from expenditure and income, should always equal. So we're going to use the input-output table for different purposes. For the normal analysis that not require a detailed sectoral impact analysis, we use the 19 by 19 sector, okay, product sector. So it's just a mere over-the-board macro policy or anything like that. If we need a detailed sectoral impact, then we use a more detailed version of input-output table, such as the 48 or 111 or 101 industry sector. So the most detailed agriculture, we have around 20 sector products, services 38, and manufacturing around 34. So we add up together is 101. So when we analyze, we need the model, the equation that derived from the process I described earlier, and some of the key parameters that required in those demand equation, which is elasticity mostly, the changes in prices, how the changes in price would lead to the change of quantity in Hamilton, which is the distinction of demand for intermediate input from domestically produced and imported, and export elasticity, freeze parameter to calculate the demand for household, and some other assumption of the model. So when we analyze, we simple as illustrated to assume that economy is represented by a simple supply and demand curve. So from the supply side, which is the GDP at the factor cost, is a function of capital, labor, and land. So it depends on the assumption that we're going to make, whether it is short run or the long run. In the case that to present it today, we assume that it's a short run economy, a short run impact. So we assume that capital stock would be fixed. So the adjustment from the supply side is through the changes in the labor market. And from the demand side, all the output had to sell for household consumption, which is C, or for investment capital formulation, which is I, or government spending, or for the trade, or for the export process. So that is how we assume from the supply and demand, and it always equal as an identity. So with that, we can use it to analyze what would be the impact. Okay, so first we try to test the model, whether it can say anything, giving the initial assessment of the damage and losses in production due to Cyclone Winston. And then try to say something, look, if this is the extent of the damage, what would be the required policy response? It could be expansionary fiscal policy in the case that we illustrate here, which is the 20% increase in government spending and 10% in total investment. Of course, this number is not a single year number. It's just to illustrate what is the required stimulus to make sure that economic would not shrink or would not contract by this mere side impact of the cyclone. Of course, we have two scenario simulation here. So this is an initial damage and loss assessment by the government team. So with that, we have that number, both the damage and loss in production, and how we going to use those numbers, try to calculate the implication on the economy as a whole. So, with that, the only part that the model can capture is the loss of production. So, how we view and how we go into incorporate that into the model, we're saying that because of the cyclone, there's a loss in the total factor productivity. What does it mean? It means that industry would produce less because of the damage to their productive asset. So we're going to use this in the last column, pretty much similar to the loss in the output assessed by the government. So in the case of agriculture, the loss is pretty big, but it is propagated in many years. So because this is a short-run simulation, we assume that in the short run, 9% loss in total productivity would be a good number to assess the potential impact. And the rest of the assessment, we use a similar output loss, translate into the loss into total productivity when we run the simulation. With that, the impact on the macro economy is pretty huge. In terms of GDP, the cyclone would lead to, if nothing else happened, so it is the way that we analyze. So let's say only the cyclone alone, what happened to economy as a whole? The loss in GDP would be very big. It is around 4.8%, household consumption by 4%, export 3%, and the aggregate or the total employment loss close to 1.39%. So this is how economic would be in the short run if nothing else happened, okay? The loss to the economy. So the second simulation, we're talking about, well, there must be reconstruction of fort put forward by the government. We just play around with the number that 20% government aggregate real government demand increases by 20%, followed by the aggregate real investment by 10%. It would bring the economy back to the positive territory. So we add up together the two potential loss and potential stimuli, then we would get the net positive growth of the economy. So this is how we use it, knowing the impact and what is required to bring economy back to normalcy. Okay, so we can also check what is the model predicted the loss and what the actual happened in aftermath the cyclone Winston, because we can pinpoint the relationship very easily by knowing the intensity of factor how industry use, how much labor, capital, intermediate, and things like that in the production process. So the impact would be proportionate to what the structure of production of the industry. And how do they sell? Do they sell domestically, or it is for trade purpose? And because there's inter-industrial linkages, the output of one industry use as the input for another. So there's a chain effect happening in the equilibrium process. So we can see what is the impact predicted by the model in terms of the cyclone Winston simulation 1, and the potential increase of output coming from the stimuli put forward by the government. So all add up all together, we would have this net positive, some compensating the loss of the affected output of the economy. So as you can see, because of either the production structure that have that outcome and the sale pattern of the industry, we have 20% increase of public administration and defense because of more of the government spending, because the assumption that 20% increase in aggregate government spending would lead to this high increase in public administration and defense sector in the economy, and the 10% increase in the aggregate investment would link very closely to construction. That's why we see this 20% and 10% close to what we assume in the macro simulation. And these two key sector would drive the rest of the sector to a positive growth as compared to the previous simulation of the impact. Okay, so this is just the illustration when we double check how this result coming from. We look into what is the sale of the output of these 19 industry and outcome from the two simulation. As compared to what actually happened, some of the result is pretty close to what is the assessment, but some are not, of course, because what actually unfold is nothing, not what is predicted by the model. It a combination of government response in terms of reconstruction and some other adjustment, the actual adjustment of the industry aftermath. The cyclone Winston hit them. So, but overall, what we are trying to say that with limited information, maybe some engineering process of modeling of the wind speed and the potential damage through historical data, then we can plug in to the model and estimate the potential impact on the economy, and then we prepare what would require from the government or other to make the economy move back to positive territory. So that's what we're trying to do for this first exercise. Now, move to the second. Nothing happened yet, so we try to foresee what would be the impact on minimum wage on the economy as a whole. We have 3 scenarios. So first, we just hit everything by 10%. The 19 industry would increase their real wage by 10%. And the second one, just more realistic to say that the potential increase of 10% is not for every sector. It's just for the targeted sector, especially for the unskilled in 11 out of the 19, rather than the 19 sector in the previous simulation. And the third one to say that, look, to make it happen without disruption to the economy as a whole, what would be the required productivity compensating to such a potentiality? Okay, so that's the exercise. So we don't make any statement on what we prefer. It just we stick to our gun. Okay, we're just saying that if this is the case, what would be the likelihood of the impact on the economy, and the other scenario that option that are given so that we can manage this policy clearly. Of course, if I have to take stand on whether minimum wage have to increase, then we have to look into what's happening on the ground, whether low wage discourage people from participating in the labor market, or low wage deter people from working harder, so that to increase productivity in life. So with additional information, then we can make a judgment whether such policy should go ahead. So that this is a thing that happen in practice. But in this simulation, we're just showing that what if it's 10% increase or for all, or 10% increase in selected sector and worker, what would happen, and what would be the compensating productivity enhancement to make it happen in this in the case. We start from what we understand required by the minimum wage of these 10 industry that in the law, and then see if it is to increase to 4% uniform, what would be the percentage change of from the baseline to the new proposed, for example, 4% per hour. So for the case of mining, if it is the case, it close to 11, and for other, it would increase to pretty much 25 to 34%. This is to show that the degree of the increase would that significant. But what we are in the simulation, we just assume that it is 10% across the board, what would happen, and 10% in selected 11 industry, what would happen. So the 10% across the board simulation is not no use. It is to quantify the unemployment elasticity to wage, which is normally estimated by using aggregate macro data in the past. Singh and Hussain already did that in using the time series data, and they estimate that the elasticity is close to I think it's 0.2, something like that. Okay, so we try to see whether the model predict the overall unemployment to wage elasticity close to what already estimated. So that the 10% across the board simulation. And the second case is more realistic if the 10% increase would go ahead. And the last one is the productivity required to make this 10% increase without much disruption to the economy. In practice, we're doing the reverse thing. Actually, the 4% is coming from the predicted by the model. We playing around with the number, and so that we can pinpoint exactly this is the required increase in the productivity if the real wage increase by 10%. So if it is the case for simulation 1, we would expect some disruption to the economy. So the blue bar would tell that the GDP would decrease by 0.5% if across the board 10% increase in real wage. It accompanied by less investment and less export, and the key interest variable is aggregate employment. So if 10% across the board increase of real wage, it would lead to 1.8% reduction in the employment. So in the elasticity term, you divide 1.8 by 10, so it is 0.18. So pretty close to what is predicted and previous study at the macro level. So in that sense, the model pretty sensible in predicting what is the likelihood of the impact of across the board 10% increase in the real wage. More realistically, a 10% increase in selected 11 out of the 19 sector 10% for the unskilled worker, would not have significant impact on GDP. So it only lead to a 0.2% decrease in real GDP, slightly reduction in aggregate investment, 0.6, and only 0.4% reduction in employment. So to make that happen, if the productivity of those 11 industry increased by 4%, so we can perfectly reverse back the 10% increase in the real wage of 11 selected sector. So GDP would be moved back to 0.2. So you add up together. So there's no impact at all on GDP, and some other adjustment on the economy. Well, and we can also project the potential impact at the industrial level in terms of output for each of the scenario. So across the board, 10% increase in the real wage would have different impact on the sector. Again, it depends on whether it's a labor-intensive industry or it is export and import competing industry that most likely to be affected by this across the board increase in the minimum wage. So we can see that the most effective would be in transport, storage, construction, accommodation and food services, mine and quarrying, and professional services. And then the magnitude of the impact would be smaller when we look into the simulation 2 and the reverse of this negative impact of the scenario 2 by the productivity improvement of simulation 3 to compensate the output loss in this simulation. Again, this is how the model works. You have one scenario and different scenario and option to consider an effective way to introduce the actual policy in practice. It's just elaboration on the impact on employment and output for each simulation. Okay, so I think I'm good on time. So in concluding, I think Ruth already mentioned a lot. The model is good enough because there's no bug. Everything behaves sensibly. There's no error, and it can be ready to use as illustrated by Ruth, that we're going to work closely with the faculty member, define the problem that they want to analyze, and use the model to make that happen. So it's good to analyze what happened in the past, to validate whether the policy that introduced in the past is effective, or to foresee the likelihood of a new thing, changes in technology, changes in policy that may have both good and bad consequences on the economy as a whole. So the model can tell us, have a lot of information, comprehensive information on the winner and the loser, so that it is on any policy to introduce, we can, in practice, can validate by talking to affected, both the winner to actually make a sense or additional assessment of the practical introduction of the policy. So I think for that I conclude my presentation and welcome your question and input so that we can make this thing more practical and better. For that, thank you very much for your attention. Okay. All right. Okay. Over there.
We're having to develop policy for the government to consider around the transportation industry, the effect of the transportation industry, and working with you and having this model available has been really beneficial. So I congratulate you because it's really useful to be able to see the effects and the policy decisions which we develop on a small scale, then scale up into the larger economy of how it will affect them. And whilst we haven't got all the information together yet to go to the government, I'm sure they'll be very grateful to be able to look at how the costs and the benefits of any policy proposal is forward. So congratulations.
Okay. Thank you.
Share who's affected by an increase in the minimum wage. So to say how many people are, or what is the share of workers who are receiving actually the minimum wage?
Because it is hypothetical, so what we're doing, we just assume a certain portion. In the case that our simulation for the second case, it's just that 10%. We assume that 10% would be applied to the unskilled worker in the 11 selected sector of the economy. So what the actual proportion of, the unskilled worker actually eventually receive the minimum wage, that a separate exercise. Would that answer your question?
Yeah. I have to be satisfied.
So in the model, we can only shock exogenous variable. So we only either make quantity fixed, price change, or the other way around, or naturally exogenous variable such as productivity, technology across industry and sector, or taxes, and some other preferences variable that are exogenous. We assume that it's fixed. If it is changed, if that the variable that we can change outside, and then the model would estimate these responses to changes in exogenous variable. Okay. Please.
As a way of enhancing the storytelling around what's going on in the simulation. So households are selling their labour and, they have an increase in minimum wage and they increase their consumption and that causes X, Y, Z, as a way of describing it. That's a comment. And the question is, maybe you can talk a little bit about why employment falls in the productivity shock.
Why it's 4? Is it your last question?
Yeah.
Okay. All separate equation for each agent. For industry, for household, how they maximize the utility subject to the budget constraint. So there's all capture, but we can't, present it in a more technical way in this workshop. But actually, they are covered in the model. Otherwise, we cannot estimate the changes in their behavior in terms of how much they consume more or less with respect to a household, or how firms adjust their production to any shock to the economy. So we can illustrate it in a technical detail.
Do governments borrow? Are there government bonds in the model?
No.
You know, but that's important, right? So if you're going to have a fiscal expansion, how is it funded? Or is it assumed that the money is coming from offshore? Or, so that part of the explanation, I think, would be nice to have if possible. And then consumers, you know, what kind of, do they borrow? What's their budget constraint? I'm not, you know, it's just a suggestion.
Okay, I get your point. Actually, in our paper, we detail all the things that you just described. But at the aggregate level, I can say that we don't model how the total government spending would be affected. We assume that it is exogenous. It is, reflected in the budget law. Whatever that is there, it have to go through that process. Of course, your question about where did 20%, for example, increase in the spend, whether it's from tax revenues or borrowing overseas, that the different scenario that we can also capture if it is a case in more detail. And the 4% that we have actually a process of iteration so that we can match exactly the total factor productivity, required total productivity increase to make that happen. Right? So it's just the way that we saying that, look, if I run another simulation without saying that it would not affect GDP, I put GDP 0, and then what is the required productivity increase so that such assumption would hold. That's how we get it. Okay. All right. Okay. Firm actually could actually use less and spend less because of more productivity enhancement. So we can just in practice maybe there's some losses in employment because of huge improvement in labor productivity. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the present. Increase in productivity causes some unemployment, and this is something that
that's right. That's right.
That what it simply means is if there are 50 workers and they improve productivity, some of them is going to go home because they're producing chairs, and all they were supposed to produce is 1,000 chairs. Now they produce more. Mm-hmm. There's not enough demand. They have to go home. So, policy making, I think that's something that, as I said, I think we need to be careful.
Okay.
The third issue you said is that, the increase in the wages for the 11 sectors it causes unemployment as well as a reduction in GDP. The numbers that you shown there, one of the things is policymakers, I think the most important thing is this. If you increase minimum wages by 10%, it reduces GDP by 0.5%. I would think, as policymakers, we need to be very careful of how we use this number. In a period when the economy is growing quite strong, the number could be less than 0.5. Right. But in a period when the economy is not growing, or could be,
more. Yep.
Yeah, and so this is something that we need. Also, if cost is going up, if cost of business is going up, if cost of your funds, interest rates goes up, and together you bring that, more people will be laid off. So I think, in reality, policy making is not that easy as, you increase this is going to happen. There are a lot of things that happening all at the same time. And I think we need to be mindful of the results of this model and based on what set of data it is and the current state of economy for policy implication.
That's right. I concur with you that that what I mentioned, okay? The model is just one dimension. We need one used in practice, we need to be careful. It has to be verify what the actual situation of the industry, sensitivity to the cost, that something that would be the burden for them. Take your point that the way we're not saying that like a straightforward it just from the model. It need to be accommodated by consultation and secondary check with actually what happening in the industry it is. Yeah.
And I think what my colleague here said the other earlier is that, particularly in terms of this minimum wage debate is very topical in Fiji. And if you look at that number, if you increase minimum wages by 10%, it's only going to cause a 1.8% decline in aggregate employment. I think we need to be very careful of how we use that data, because there could be some sectors that employment could fall by more than 10%.
Of course,
but there are some sectors that may not, and really that is very critical for when you analyze the economy in terms of how it's going to impact each and every sector.
That's right. Yeah.
Somebody might say, "Oh, it's only causing a 1% decline in employment," so that's fine. But I think there could be some sectors that are so worse off that it could kill the sector.
That's right. So this is sectoral impact that have more detail on employment by sector, not and of course it sum up to aggregate.
Even in this, I think you need to be careful. For example, if you look at construction sector have got a whole range of trades there. There are some carpenters, some plasters, and they all have different salary levels or wages. Likewise, if you look at the garments sector, so sometimes putting it all in one basket, construction, I'm not sure whether this will give the results on the ground. I know you have got limitations in your model, but all I'm trying to say is these are some of the problems when you do modeling.
Of course.
Thank you, Governor. Can I just add to that? Precisely that's the reason why we are saying that there will have to be more revisions and other versions to come, because there are certain aspects of things that we want to capture more seriously. So there's a reason for revisions.
I'd also suggest being really clear about what the baseline is. I mean, reminding the audience frequently, what is the baseline? Otherwise, the numbers are a little bit hard to interpret.
Well, the baseline is the input-output table that we are using.
I know, but so I'm a policymaker and I want to know how the change in unemployment is, and you tell me it's 3% from baseline, and that the baseline is the input-output table, and I'm not really sure what to do with that.
So, all right, I understand if we going to communicate the number to the policymaker, that different story. So in a paper, actually, we illustrate, from the survey data, what is the current employment by sector, what is the unemployment rates, 5%, and is high for the youth, so that the status of our economy that we understand based on the latest data. Right. From that, we just illustrate if any policy changes, what it would have to do with the current state of the economy. So this is just the deviation from the baseline, whether the economy in 2015 or now, what we understand the state of the economy as it is, that we can quantify whatever happened, that is the deviation from the state of the economy that we could quantify. That would answer, still very technical, or I don't know. But
no, I think it just depends on what you're using the model for.
Yep.
So if it's an exercise in thinking through how the economy responds in a theoretical way, then that's fine to do it from baseline. But if you're actually going to provide advice, then you would need to maybe present it in a way that's more intuitive.
Sure. That's the skill that I need to learn. Yeah, please.
Hi. I missed the beginning of today's event, so I was just wondering, what are the next steps? What do you plan to do? Will this be released will the model be released to public, or is it just the results that you're releasing? And I'm just hearing that you're looking into further sort of iterations. Are you looking at some additional shocks, for example, or expanding the model? So if you could maybe give some summary.
So, good question. Like I mentioned, we are from the economy. What we're doing, we try to have a tool that can be useful. So it can only become useful when we communicate with policymaker, and to have the problem and try to analyze it in the best possible, objectively possible. So that's the step that we are taking, and I hope that there will be more requests, because the purpose of today is just basically to say that, look, we have the model. Something that has been going on here, it keep improving, and we're happy to use it to serve the purpose of the policy needs of various government agencies. And then, of course, we're going to conduct training to look into the detail inside, to avoid it. People will question, what is it? How this number coming from? The process of understanding the basic feature in monitor. So we're going to conduct training. We're going to do that in-house in April, I think 26, and then next month, in March, probably 17. So we're going to call for the interest to come to a detailed session. Could be a one-day session. You're going to charge for that, okay? Yeah? No free lunch, no? Going to be free lunch, or we're going to charge? Better charge some money to, to buy snack or foods, things like that, okay? Is it okay? Yeah, we're going to do that. So that's the step that we're going to make.
Suthia, can I just add to that? I think in the initial stages, it's important for us to have people come on board and learn a little bit more on this. So we'll not charge you. The school will pay for it, and we'll get you to learn what we're doing, and then later on we'll see how we want to progress from there. I'm not saying that we'll be charging for anything as such, but it remains the intellectual property of the university, so we'll work details out on that. And once done, then we will try to have these models installed in Reserve Bank and the Ministry of Finance, a couple of other places, and so that the people there can actually use this and help them to do what they're doing better, I suggest.
Sorry, is there any chance you can maybe reduce the number of equations in the model? I'm kind of thinking, if I'm going to talk to the minister and I said that there's 8,000 equations in this model, I don't know, maybe the minister can come back next year. So I think while it's useful, I think we need to be mindful too that if policies will be based on this, you might need the checks of all the major policymakers, because I think there's a trouble or the issue with big models like this is the storytelling part. Policy making is, if you can't tell a story, then this thing will be shelved for maybe the next generation or something. So that's maybe one thing you can improve. I think it might help if you can reduce the number of equations, or otherwise, if you're going to educate maybe students or those interested, maybe start from a very basic model, then build up from them. One producer, one consumer, government, and all those things. I think that way we can understand better. But if you're going to tell us about 8,000 equations, good luck with that.
No, I think point taken. So the art of doing science is different from the art of communication. So there's a lot of way that we can communicate. So I think there's a shortcoming from our side. That's why people keep questioning, is it a black box? Why is it so complicated? We don't understand it. So the number put in is just a garbage in and garbage out. So this is a common criticism that we receive. So yes, I think the way that we're going to use and communicate with policymaker should be very different from what we are doing today. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the good work. 2 comments. Number one, these simulation models is useful and also good only if the model works and predicts the reality reasonably well. So in the beginning, I was a bit worried about that accuracy. But we can check for the historical event. You showed the comparison of the predictions on the model. and also the actual result for the Winston's recovery case. And actually, the results distributed to the sectors, that's reasonably well predicted. So I'm kind of relieved, and I congratulate your work. My comment number 2 is the distributions pointed by some commenters. We are looking at the distribution across the industries, and of course that is important. And if we have a data, we can go further to the subsectors that is more useful. Another distribution is the households, and I understand it's just one group now, probably because of the data availability. But for the policymakers, it's important that how this impact affects the different types of households, low income, the high income levels, rural and urbans. I'm not sure if we have enough data, but obviously the different types of household have different types of impact, in particular minimum wage. Obviously that benefits the low income households compared with the high income households. That is important for the policymakers. Government is always proposing the inclusive growth, and that is also supported by the ADBs. So if we have more data and more resources, that is another areas that we can see the extension of the model. Thanks.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, that's the direction that we are trying to pursue. So I hope that the Bureau give us the household income and expenditure survey so that we can split the one single household into can be 10, can be more, depending on category that is important for the inclusive agenda, so that we can better map their consumption and income perfectly. So whatever happened to the economy, so the distribution would be well more understood. Yeah, we're going to do that in the next step. The thing is we don't have the data.
Can I get to that comment here on the 8,000 plus equations, and you wanted to reduce it a bit? That's on the version that has 101 industry sectors. So probably you're happy to work with 19 by 19, which will have much more lower number of equations. So
we can do we can do a 3 version when we do the training.
Yeah, whichever will be suitable
just
to you.
Three industry.
At the same time, you do not need to solve the equations yourself. The system software will do it for you. So really, you shouldn't be really worried whether you have 8,000 or 4,000. It's the system which is helping you to find solution to the model.
Okay. Any other question? Oh, otherwise I hand over to Pauline. Is it okay? Or I can stay on and no worry about. Right, otherwise, okay. Thank you very much for the very productive inputs and reaction. We know our limitation and we want to improve. That's the purpose of today's workshop. Thank you for interacting.
Very much. I think, that was quite a lot of information. And let's give another round of applause, congratulating the team. Thank you. Now I will invite Mr. Kemweli Nengama the Deputy Government Statistician of the Fiji Islands Bureau of Statistics, please, to come and give the closing remarks. Naka.
Naga, the Vice Chancellor and President of the University of the South Pacific, the Regional Director for the Pacific Sub-Regional Asian Development Bank, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow colleagues. First of all, I wish to thank the university, in particular the Center for Economic Policy and Modeling, for the invitation and to be part of this important lodging workshop. And also would like to thank the Asian Development Bank through its Pacific Sub-Regional Office based here in Suva for supporting the center. On the outset, I wish to say that the Fiji Bureau of Statistics will continue to support the center in the provision of data for economic modeling and policy research. Talking about data, I have taken note on this morning's discussion and deliberations, as well as the concerns raised with regards to the challenges faced by the center to achieve its goals. Therefore, I have generally grouped the points into three main categories, which I wish to share with you and my colleagues as well at the Fiji Bureau of Statistics. The first point is data quality or data integrity. The need to have completeness of data, timeliness, the validity, the accuracy of data, and to be consistent as well, taking into account the amount of work, that has been conducted by the center and illustrated in this morning's launching. The second point is to understand our users, the urgency behind the need for data, to understand their needs and their capabilities, and the capabilities of people who will be using the data. In collaboration with the center, we realized that the need to quantify the data, as well as to be careful of the way that we measure the data, so that it will reflect what is intended in terms of modeling and policy research. So the production and the release of data that will fit the intended uses, whether it's with regards to operations such as modeling, decision-making, or planning. And lastly, which is important, the collaboration part, engaging with our stakeholders early and often or regularly, and looking at the common goals so that it benefits all. Having said that, I again wish to thank you for the invitation and wish the center all the success in its future modeling and policy research work. Vinaka, and God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Nengama. Ladies and gentlemen, before we disperse, I would like to remind you once again about our next event, which will be a public lecture by the Chief Economist of the ADB, Asian Development Bank, and this will be held on May the 6th in this very theater, the Japan Pacific ICT Multipurpose Theater here at USP. And with that, I would like to thank everyone here for being part of today's launching workshop. Vinaka Bakalevu, and good afternoon.